Hello friends, I'd like to speak about 3 forces for unhappiness, both as personal habits and also as forces in our increasingly globalized world that institutionalize these forces to the detriment of our planet, of our cultures and of our personal well-being. So these forces, demands, defenses, and distractions. And before I start to talk about those, I'd like to start with a story. It goes back a while to a monk dying in a cave in Thailand. And one of my teachers moved into that cave that had been thus vacated, and found when he moved in that the monk, before he died, had left a message on the cave wall. And he'd drawn a picture of a monkey swinging delightfully from a branch. And underneath it said, "Oh, what joy to know there is no happiness in this world." Yeah. I'm kind of used to that line provoking a certain reaction, because we tend to hear the last part, no happiness in this world. And the sense of, what? Well, what's the point? Well, that can't be right. And we don't hear so much the first part of the line, oh, what joy to know there is no happiness in this world. And so I'd like to unpack that a little bit. A few days ago, on the way here, I flew from London to Delhi, and it reminded me of taking that same flight about 25 years ago. Except that time I was 19 years old. I arrived in Delhi with a one-way ticket, with no luggage whatsoever, and with no real idea what I was doing, except as many have taken that journey before me from west to east, I was, like all of us are, in our various ways, I was searching for, looking for, longing for happiness. I wanted to be happy, and I really felt like I didn't know where to start. I'd grown up in a loving family with good friends, and I'd done well at school, and so I felt like the conditions are there, and my culture and environment reflected back to me that that should make me happy. And yet actually I was miserable and confused. I somehow wanted something else, and because the ingredients for happiness seemed to be there, that troubled me further. So I was miserable and confused about the fact that I was miserable and confused. And so I arrived in India kind of questioning, what is happiness actually? And where do we look? Where should I really look for it? So happiness, it seems, in many ways, is the opposite of these conditions, these forces. Happiness suggests a condition where I don't need anything to be different. I don't need to get anything or get rid of anything in order to enjoy, to delight in, to appreciate what's here. We might say that the condition of happiness is one in which one is undemanding, undefended, undistracted. And in terms of the second question, where we look for it, well, like we were hearing just from the previous speaker, we tend to look for it in gratification. We tend to look for it in terms of getting what I want. Basic materialism, right? Not just things, right? That's part of it, trying to get things, but also around people. If I had her or him, or just around experiences, if that happened to me, if I had had that experience. And yet, the pursuit of things and people and experiences, it doesn't really work very well. Because, as you no doubt know from your own experience, no sooner do you get something, then there's something else to want. The cycle is endless. And the image we might use is that we're like hamsters. Hamsters on their wheel. Right? Running. If you've ever watched a hamster on its wheel, right, running, it's incredible how convinced they look that they're getting somewhere. And yet, it seems that we're equally convinced. And yet, even when we do get what we want, it doesn't provide us anything durable, lasting, etc. Now, it would be easy to blame consumer culture on this, right? And advertising. Advertising has done a great job of exploiting this movement in us, these forces, has done a great job of telling us and promoting the idea that things and people and experiences will somehow do the trick for us. But our hunger for happiness and our habits of seeking happiness, of course, are way older than consumer culture. So, 2,500 years ago, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, was talking about exactly these three forces as the forces of human unhappiness. In Buddhist language, they're called greed, hatred, and delusion. I've been speaking about them as demand, defense, and distraction. We could equally, if we like mnemonics, call them neediness, negativity, and nonsense. Three basic ways that we move away from ourselves, that we move away from where we are. In the demand, in the hunting for, the hoping for happiness out there somewhere. In the defense, the shrinking, the tightness, the refusal, the rejection of what we don't like, and the getting uptight about that. And in the distraction, the spacing out, the losing ourselves in all manner of ways. Whether through the habits of losing ourselves in drink or drugs, the habit of losing ourselves in the increasing wonderment with our digital devices, the fact that we've never been so connected, as it were, and yet research suggests we've never felt so lonely. So these forces of demand, defense, and distraction were spoken about 2,500 years ago. And they're still the forces that are running our lives, usually, and running our world. Except we live in a world which is much more connected, more globalized, more institutionalized, and so these three forces are running our global institutions. The force of demand has been institutionalized as consumer culture, driven along by advertising. It promises us the happiness of gratification, but it delivers a kind of endless compulsion. It delivers addiction. It delivers a consumption of our planetary resources at a rate that we can't possibly sustain. The force of defense, institutionalized by the militaries of the world, manufactured and maintained through the endless warmongering in our world, feeding from our fear and the political rhetoric that supports it, and with the promise of safety, protection, right? The idea that we're fighting for peace, that we're invading for peace, and yet what it's delivering is that fear, a sense of contraction, a reinforcing of us and them, nationalism, racism, religious fundamentalism and sectarianism. And the force of distraction, institutionalized by the global media, promising us the fun and excitement of all kinds of entertainment, and yet leading us into this kind of confusion and the endless habit of moving away from ourselves. So, 25 years ago, I arrived in India, and yes, that's what I looked like. And I got into these various Buddhist practices, which involve a certain willingness to step back from the seeking, from the trying to get happy out there, into the willingness to actually really find out what's here. That's enough of me, I think. Those practices are increasingly, and they're increasingly having an impact in all different avenues of life, increasingly known as mindfulness. Although that's not really the term I learned them as. It strikes me as a little strange term. Right? Part of the problem I found was that mind was already had a lot of fullness, right? Full of the demands and defenses and distractions. I learned it as what one of my teachers called happiness training. Caring more about being here than about trying to be happy. So, just for a moment, I'd like to invite you to actually stop and see, stop and feel, stop and sense. What's here? What's here? And I don't mean here in Bhutan, I don't mean here in this room. I mean here in the most direct sense, the most intimate sense, the most direct, embodied sense. So let yourself just feel your body sitting on the seat. Let yourself feel the natural rhythm and movement of your breathing. Notice if there are any subtle demands, contractions. It's easy for us to miss because we're so habituated to those movements firing in different ways. It's hard to be here. We find that we like the idea, right? Oh, letting go of the stress of seeking happiness. To allow for an appreciation, a delight in, a sense of the blessings of just the fact of being alive, of what's here. And yet our habits keep taking us in a different direction. It's hard to be here. That's why we call it training. But what's really hard is not to be here. What's really hard is to be endlessly caught on that wheel. The wheel that the Buddhists call samsara. That's really hard. So my invitation is to give up trying to be happy. And to be more interested in the training of being here. To make that journey from the stress of somehow believing happiness is out there waiting for me, to seeing what kind of ease, sensitivity, responsiveness, care might be found in being here. So remember that line of the monk in the cave? And I don't think his drawing of a monkey looked much like this one. But then we might look at that first part of the sentence. We might sense a freedom of possibility, an invitation of life, to go against the stream of that hunger and seeking, to find a joy, a certain relief, a possibility to be here in a way that's undemanding, undefended, undistracted, happy.